Hi everyone, it's Yvette Le Blowitz from spiritgirl.com and welcome to Feel Good From Within. I'm super excited to be here with you today and with our very special guest, Jordanna Levin, who is the best-selling author of Make It Happen and Higher Love and the host of 3 successful podcasts. With a background in journalism, she has built a reputation for taking big topics and making them relatable, digestible, and downright entertaining. I'm super excited that we're going to be talking about her brand new book today, which is Make You Happen, Manifest Your Best Self. Welcome back to the Spirit Girl podcast show. How are you today?
I'm really good. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Before we dive into your book, are you happy to tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
I'm an author. I've authored 3 books, which you just mentioned in the opening of this. My background is journalism. So I worked as a journalist for over 15 years and then started writing for myself in 2018. The books that I have published, I guess we would call them personal development books, but I always feel a bit iffy saying that because although they are personal development books, I think they differ to the books that are on the shelf. I try and make my writing very relatable, very practical. I try and introduce pop culture references and things that make it fun so that people want to keep reading and feel inspired to apply these different practices to their own life.
Can you tell us a little bit about your brand new book, Make You Happen, Manifest Your Best Self? What's the meaning behind that title?
Well, it's actually a follow-up to my first book, which was called Make It Happen. And Make It Happen was about manifestation. So it was like this sort of really snappy, quick formula for manifestation. Make It Happen's done really, really well. And we wanted to do a follow-up book, but a few years had passed since I sat down and wrote Make It Happen. And I'd had a lot of revelations about my own manifestation practice in that time. And basically, this book was born from the premise that in order to manifest what you want, you first have to acknowledge that you manifest who you are. So who you are day to day, who you're showing up as in the world is going to have the most profound impact on your manifestation practice. And I think when we look at personal development in all of its facets, so any personal development work, any self-help work that you do, the foundation of all of that is a strong self-awareness practice. But if you go out and try and find a book about self-awareness, there isn't anything really out there. So I wanted to write that book.
Wow, that's incredible. And going back to your childhood, you share this in your book where you got brought up quite spiritually in terms of your mother was a tarot card reader. Can you share a little bit more insight into that for our audience?
I grew up really spiritual. My mum was super spiritual. My dad was quite corporate. He wasn't not spiritual, but he wasn't a hippie. He put on a suit every day and went to work. And we had a lot of things growing up that many people sort of have to discover for themselves, but they were just part of everyday life for me. We had crystals and incense and we talked about the universe. We watched the moon. Mum was a hairdresser, but she also did tarot card readings at home for people. And spiritual language and spiritual terminology and spiritual practices were a big part of my life growing up. I talk about in the book the fact that I didn't sort of have to discover it for myself like a lot of other people did. So what happened to me was I sort of lent to this side of having to discover what it was like to not be spiritual. And I actually found myself kind of relinquishing all my spiritual practices for a period of time in my 20s, which, reflecting on it, was actually so beneficial to me because what I realized then was which of those spiritual practices actually benefited me and which of them I was just doing because I thought it made me a spiritual person.
Wow. And when it comes to self-awareness,
there's lots of different ways to look at self-awareness, but self-awareness is really having an acute awareness of who you are on the inside rather than who you are on the outside. And I've sort of split self-awareness into 3 steps. So the 3 steps of self-awareness are curiosity, acceptance, and embodiment. So the curiosity aspect is pretty much what the book's about. It's allowing you to get curious about who you are in the different aspects of your life. So who you identify as, how you process your emotions and express them, having a look at your different energetic capacities. We talk about communication in the book. We talk about love, sex, and desire. And then finally, we talk about intuition and spirituality. And in all those different aspects, we get curious and have a look at what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are so that you can embrace both sides of that spectrum wholeheartedly, because that's what makes you a whole person. The next step is acceptance. And the acceptance step is really important because it's one thing to get curious and do the digging about who you are, but you have to also acknowledge and accept it. Because if you're not acknowledging, accept it, and you sort of see it in yourself but push it away, that's not a self-awareness practice. So what we want to do from that point is the third step, which is embodiment. It's about integrating what you've learned about yourself and thinking, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to show up in the world? How can I reach my potential now that I know exactly who I am?
And what was also interesting in your book was you talked about you used to enjoy going to see psychics.
Yeah.
But then when you developed your own self-awareness, you were able to trust yourself more and trust your own intuition.
I love seeing psychics. I still see them. I have a check-in with a particular psychic once a year. What happened though for a period of time is that I was relying on them to tell me what to do, to reassure me, to give me faith, to give me trust that things were going to work out. And by relying so heavily on what was external to me, I wasn't listening to my own guidance system. I didn't trust what I thought to be true to me. I didn't have faith that everything was going to be okay and everything was going to work out unless someone else told me it would. And the problem with that is that it becomes a crutch and we lean on it and we forget to listen to ourselves. So again, I had to sort of go cold turkey on it and remove them from my life completely and start to listen to myself, knowing that we are all intuitive. Some of us just don't want to listen to what we have to say.
When it comes to manifestation, you have talked about this throughout your book, how important self-awareness is in order to manifest.
In order to manifest what we want, we have to acknowledge that we manifest who we are. And by that, I mean the frequency that you're emitting, the energy that you walk into the world with every day is what's going to be attracting certain things to you. So it's one thing to sit down and set an intention for what you want to manifest, which I do encourage people to do, but how you're showing up in each and every moment, how you communicate with yourself, the people around you, the universe or God or whoever you want to call it, that is just as important as setting those intentions. So really understanding yourself, having an awareness of how you feel and what you want and what you desire in this lifetime is paramount to manifestation.
And you also talk in your book about these social expectations, like we should be married by the time we're 30 and a kids, a house, probably 2 houses, and all of these things. Obviously, if you want to be self-aware and stay true to yourself, sometimes those social ideals aren't going to fit in.
Yeah, I think the pandemic really highlighted to us how societal expectations were limiting what we thought our timelines were. I know for a lot of people who were single when the pandemic hit, they started freaking out when we weren't allowed to leave the house because all the timelines they'd sort of set themselves were being pushed back. How am I going to meet someone? How am I going to have a baby? How am I going to do X, Y, and Z? What I try and talk about in the book is having a look at what some of the societal expectations are that you feel like you haven't hit yet. And, you know, relationships and children and all of that, that's just one aspect. There's a lot of like career stuff, like you said, owning your own home. Some of the societal expectations are set by your family. But what I ask people to do in there is question which of those expectations are actually their own expectations of themselves and which expectations have been set by somebody way back in the 20s when times were a lot different. I realized that there were a bunch of expectations that I had of myself based on what society expected of me. And once I started to question them, it took the pressure off me a little bit more.
And you talk about the beautiful Jennifer Aniston from Friends in your book. And there's one social expectation that we should all have hair like Jennifer Aniston. And I grew up in that era watching Friends, and that being the number one haircut that every girl or woman on this planet needed to have. You obviously love watching Friends.
I do love watching Friends. I've watched it a lot. I was watching it when I was writing this book, which I think is very evident when you read it because there's a lot of Friends references in there. The Rachel hair thing is a very brief comment made in the book, but basically I tell the story of being in a waiting room in a doctor's surgery, and there was a young girl who was reading a Marie Claire magazine, and Jennifer Aniston was on the cover. Jennifer Aniston in her 50s, not Jennifer Aniston in Friends days. And it just reminded me what a pedestal I'd put Jennifer Aniston on when I was growing up. I just wanted to be exactly like her. And although I never cut my hair like her, I did have photos of her and Brad in my wallet as inspiration of what I wanted my body to look like. And basically in that section of the book is identity, and how for so long we have identified who we are and who we have the potential to be based on our bodies, which is not the way we want to be identifying. You know, it's such a superficial way to decide who you are and how you fit in the world. We look at a lot of different superficial aspects of identity in that chapter. We look at fashion choices, and I don't think fashion is superficial. I love clothes, but it's recognizing that what you wear isn't who you are. It can make you feel a certain way, and that's really powerful, but it doesn't define who you are.
I loved how you intertwined Jennifer Aniston. I have to say, I'm going to put it out there, but I did get a haircut quite like her, but I cut it myself. My mum said I wasn't allowed to cut my hair like Jennifer Aniston, and I went ahead anyhow and dyed it with a friend in the park toilet, my local park, thinking that my mum wouldn't actually know that I went from brown hair to kind of like light blonde hair.
Yeah.
And then I cut it, and it was so badly cut that I had to then pull it up into a little kind of like ponytail, like up the top, because it was so badly cut. And then I got called Fountainhead at primary school. I got called Fountainhead because then I had to pull it up because I just did not have the Jennifer Aniston haircut, and I cut it so badly. I don't know how little I was then, but I was a very naughty child. I feel that I'm pretty grateful. When I grew up, we just had a magazine, and you could maybe just look at it in the news agency. And if your parents said, we're not buying it, you could walk out.
Yeah. Or like start the magazine if it was triggering you in any way.
But now women and girls of all ages, they're just bombarded with images. I mean, Instagram is a body image platform, posting modeling photos. For someone who is really struggling with their body image, you have a lot of tips in here, and you talk more about identity. I found that section to be really interesting. You also talk about emotions, and we go to this dinner party. But how important is emotions to you and for your readers in terms of learning how to process them?
It's super important. I say that because I'm not great at it. So I know how important it is. I'm very cerebral. I think everything and I don't always feel it. I sometimes try and bypass my feelings by thinking them rather than actually feeling them. So I have a really good sort of indication of how important it is to actually try and process them. And I think what's most important about emotions is to realize that we all process and express emotions differently. And that's normal. There is no right or wrong way, but having an awareness of how you personally do it is really important so that you can say, all right, I have a tendency to think my emotion rather than feel it. So what would happen right now if I just allowed myself to actually feel the emotion, feel it process through my body, and then release it? What is the benefit of doing that? So it's playing around with these different aspects of self. What that dinner party is basically is an exaggeration of all the different ways that people express emotions so that you are able to identify which dinner guest you relate to, and you probably relate to a few. They're all very over the top, but you relate to a few, and then I give tips and hints on how we can embody different aspects of the different guests.
And another thing that was super interesting in your book, you talk about how we can identify with spirituality in a way where people buy crystals or they buy certain items, material things,
Yeah.
basically, that are
Yeah.
assigned to an identity of spirituality. But
Mm.
you're saying we can take all of that material things away, become self aware, and be one with ourself and the universe. Can you share a little bit more about what spirituality means to you and why we don't need to go out and buy the latest crystal water bottle or the latest spirituality product?
First of all, I just want to say, like, as a caveat, there is nothing wrong with any of those things. Like, crystals are beautiful. All of the cleansing herbs and woods and sprays and oils and whatever, they're all fantastic. What they are adornments. They're adornments to spirituality. They're not spirituality itself. So because you have a smudge stick, or because you have a rose quartz crystal, or because you pull oracle cards, that doesn't make you a spiritual person. What makes you a spiritual person is your connection to self and your connection to, again, universe, spirit, God, something greater than you, and finding what that means to you. And it's different to everybody. So again, we walk through it in the book. For some of you, it might be religion. It might be a connection to a religious practice. For others, it could just be a connection to the earth, connection to nature. But it's figuring out, again, what it is for you. And that's what this whole book is about. It's realizing that we're all unique. There's no one size fits all. So when we pick up a personal development book or a self-help book, we can only apply it to ourselves when we know exactly who we are.
That is incredible. We can only apply it to ourselves when we know who we are.
Yeah.
I love those words of wisdom. You wrote a lot of this book in the coffee shop.
I did.
So tell us, when you're at the coffee shop, what do you actually order to drink?
I get a long black with cream on the side.
And one of the other things that was interesting in here, as a writer, author, you are more productive in the morning
Yes.
and doing about 2 to 3 hours worth of work.
Yeah.
Is that something you've developed and discovered over time as a writer, as an author?
Yeah. I mean, I used to work as a writer in a corporate environment where I had to be there from 9 to 5 or 8 till 6 or whatever we were doing back then. But still, even within those hours, I was really only productive for the first 2 or 3, to be honest. And then my energy started to wane and I realized, okay, so this is a really good time to maybe review work that I've done or do some sort of data entry or something that was really kind of menial and didn't require creativity or productivity. Now that I work for myself, I know the hours of productivity for me. Some days, if I'm really excited about what I'm writing, I can go the whole day. But because I have an acute sense of awareness around my own energy, I know that if I do go the whole day, I usually won't be able to back it up the next day. And I might even have to take the day off. So what I try and do now is pump out 2 to 3, maybe 4 hours of work. And I get so much more done in those 3 hours than I do if I try and stretch it over the whole day, because I end up just sort of wasting time. So I'd rather be productive when I know I'm productive and then either rest or run errands or read or socialize or do whatever else I can in the other parts of the day. And I realize that there's privilege in that. I realize not everybody has the opportunity to do that. But like I said, even if you do work in an office or even if you do have to keep longer hours, it's working out what part of the day you're most productive and sort of shifting around your workload to match that.
I love that. And when it comes to your own self-care rituals, what does that look like for you?
That's a really good question. My self-care rituals, I spend a lot of time alone. Spending time alone is self-care for me. I really need it to recharge my energy. And the older I get, the more aware I am of that. I also find reading a really lovely self-care ritual for me. And then also things like going for a walk, having a sauna, going for a swim, those sorts of things. But again, they're all done in solitude. Self-care for me is really just taking the time and making sure that whatever activity I'm doing for myself is recharging my energy rather than depleting it.
You're absolutely glowing and you look amazing. Tell us, what is your skincare routine? I've got to ask you, your skin is glowing.
Thank you. I do put a lot of effort into my skincare routine. It's really important to me. I only use one brand really of products, and they are Go-To Skincare, a Zoe Foster Blake's brand. It's really simple. It's really gentle. There's nothing crazy about it. I always double cleanse. I always put oil and moisturizer on. I always wear SPF, always have vitamin C, always put a hyaluronic serum on. So there's lots of things that I do to nourish my skin. My skin's super important to me. Yeah.
Well, it looks amazing. So for everyone, go to the Spirit Girl YouTube channel to check your skin out. And the cover of your book is absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, thank you. Her name's Alyssa Donalo, and she's very good at what she does. But this book was modeled on Make It Happen, which was my first book.
Well, your latest book is quite entertaining. There's a story there where you experience going to do some breath work.
The reason I talk about my breathwork experience in the book, it's in the chapter about energy. So the whole book's about self-awareness. And there's 6 different aspects to self, and energy is one of them. And I'm sort of talking about an incident where I was in Bali. I was writing my first book and I had writer's block. And there's lots of different ways to look at writer's block. But one of the ways you can look at it is that there's stuck energy within the body. And that's why thoughts aren't flowing and you just can't get into the swing of things. So in a desperate attempt to unblock the energy, I was told by a few friends that had lived in Bali that I should go and try a breathwork circle. So I did. I'd done it once before, but I had a really weird experience the first time. Got to say the second time was pretty weird as well. Breathwork is this very sort of rhythmic breath that you do through the mouth. It can be quite uncomfortable at first because you feel like you're hyperventilating, and people have like lots of different reactions. Some people, their whole body sort of contorts and gets really tense. Other people have like these huge emotions that sort of pour out of them. They're like crying in the middle of this circle. Some people feel sort of this release of pain or whatever it might be. The way that it showed up for me was I got the most intense orgasm during this circle where there was, there must have been 20 strangers in the circle with me. And I kept it all very much to myself, but it was very surprising because I didn't expect energy to be released that way.
When you're in that circle, is the teacher actually telling you how to breathe and teaching the class?
Yeah, almost like a yoga teacher would. She walked around sort of talking to us, leading us through the breath as we were breathing. We were all lying down. She'd come over and she'd touch people on the shoulders while they were breathing just to center them and calm them down a little bit. She was just walking around. I mean, it was a very sort of like personal inner experience for me. It's not like it was obvious what was happening to everyone else in the room. I've spoken to a lot of different people about it, and apparently it's quite a common side effect.
And you felt that unblocked your energy, of course, and then you were able to write again.
Yeah, I went home that night, couldn't write that night, but had a very good sleep. And then the next day, the words started to flow.
Can you share the importance of rest, plus some ideas of what does rest look like?
I kind of got really excited about rest through a friend of mine called Emmy Ray, who has a business called The Daily Rest. You can find her on Instagram. She's a human design facilitator, but she also is a restorative yoga teacher. She is such an advocate for rest. And I think rest is really important once we start to have an awareness of our own energetic capacities. And I think a lot of us rest too late. We rest when we're exhausted. Sort of like when you're drinking water. If you're drinking water when you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. It's the same with rest. Like if you're not resting until you're really tired and exhausted, then it's actually a little bit too late. We need to be incorporating rest into our day like we would incorporate exercise or like we would incorporate a meal or whatever it might be. I have lots of different suggestions of how one can rest. And it basically is based on how depleted you are. If you are in extreme burnout and you are completely exhausted, then rest can look very different to somebody who is just incorporating rest into their day as a preventative. So if you are at that point of depletion, it's things like turning off all the lights, not watching television, having no sound, and lying down. Like that is proper rest. Putting an eye pillow on or having a sleep. doing restorative yoga. And if no one's done restorative yoga before, it's the kind of yoga where you are not moving. You are absolutely supported by blankets and pillows and all the sorts of things. It's not even like yin. Like yin is using more energy than restorative yoga. Restorative, you are lying there and everything is switched off. I've got lots and lots and lots of suggestions in the book, just looking at the different types of rest and how we can start to incorporate them into our lives so we don't get to that extreme burnout that unfortunately the Western world leads us to quite often.
I love that, how you included that into the book, because it's so important for our mental health and well-being that we do make time to rest. And I love that restorative yoga. It is so juicy, so nourishing, comforting. It's such a gift. Now, I could talk to you forever about your brand new book. You had the 3 steps of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And then you also included the 6 aspects of self-awareness. It's just full of so many tips. How does it feel now to see me holding up your book?
Yeah, it feels good. Never feels boring, no matter how many books you write. It's always exciting.
And what is your hope for your newfound book readers?
Well, this is my last personal development book, I've decided. So I've written 3 now. So this is the last one. So enjoy it is all I have to say about that. I'm writing fiction now. So my next book will be a novel, a fiction.
You'll be incredible at that, because these little stories that you put in there coming up with the dinner party, that was incredible. So we're very grateful that you've written 3 personal development books and you're going to switch over. Tell me, your book must have a lot of humor in them.
I hope so. Really challenging. Yes, there's humor. It's exactly the same tone and voice that I use in personal development. It's just quite an intricate storyline, this one. So I'm just praying I can pull it off.
You will be able to pull it off. No praying needed. We need some funny feel-good books. So that's incredible to know. Now, how can we stay in touch with you after this podcast show?
The best place to stay in touch with me is on Instagram. My handle is @Jordanna Levin. And my website, jordannalevin.com.
Jordanna Levin, thank you again for spending your precious time with us on the Spirit Girl podcast show. It's been a pleasure like always. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening into this week's Spirit Girl podcast episode. I truly hope you found this conversation to be of interest and benefit to you. In support, I would love if you would subscribe to the Spirit Girl podcast show on any app you're listening to this show through, or on YouTube too. Also, as a little random act of kindness, feel free to leave a rating, 5-star plus, and a review of what you loved most from this conversation too. Be sure to share this show with your family, friends, and community, to subscribe to my mailing list at spiritgirl.com, and to follow Spirit Girl or Yvette Le Blowitz on any social media app. And together, let's feel good from within.